Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who has just arrived home after his school year in Europe.
Tim Longo.
And it's good, you want to take a year off and go abroad. Well, I mean, you were kind of studying a little bit, so it's good for you.
I've been abroad for a little while.
You have been abroad for a while. Well, we won't go into that, but we will mention that, as with last week, Tim's audio quality this week will not be what it normally is. So we'll have to make do. We should be back to normal next week. Apologies for any issues. I at least will amplify him and try to reduce some of the noise, but the overall quality is still not what it normally is. Next week, we should be back to normal. So.
Yes, it's gone from my typical just kind of bad to really bad. So yeah.
I mean, you all may be suffering a little bit, but I'm suffering a lot because I can also barely hear him. So anyway,
I will try to speak up.
Yeah, you do that. Actually, don't just speak in your normal voice because you'll throw the levels off and it'll be like, oh, sometimes he's loud. Loud as far as it goes. But anyway, I should actually make a little disclosure before we discuss this game, because I actually appear in the credits of this game in the sort of special thanks of the game we're about to discuss, because I played a beta version before it was officially released, and I reported some bugs, and then subsequently I helped ship this studio's second game. So I just wanted to, mention all of that because it's probably relevant. We're not, journalists here, but it's still, people should know. But I wasn't associated with the making of the game. So enough said about that. That game is, of course, 2013's Gone Home. Now, Tim, how many walking simulators have you played before this, not counting Death Stranding?
Darn it. I shouldn't have mentioned that in pre-show. I mean, I think officially it would just be Dear Esther.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the only. I'm trying to think, because I own a couple like Firewatch, but I still have not played them. But I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think that's probably it. So, and I'd heard a lot, obviously, about this particular game, but yeah, just never got to it.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, so we're setting the baseline. Meanwhile, I've played many, so, but not Death Stranding. So, although I think I have it currently installed on my PS5 to get to the director's cut. So one of these days I will play it.
You want a walking simulator, boy, howdy, that's the one. Mm-hmm. You really think about a walking simulator where you could actually get a vehicle.
Yeah, I'm gonna get a vehicle. Unlike some. Gone Home came out in 2013, which is now setting a new high bar for us?
I can't keep track.
Well, anyway, it was a year which contained the following video games as well as many others. I'll try to front load the ones that are connected to series we played. BioShock Infinite, Batman Arkham Origins, GTA 5, Tomb Raider's reboot. We can talk about that a little bit, I guess, if you want. Dead Rising 3, Dead Space 3, and Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. I mention all of those because we have played earlier iterations of those titles as part of the podcast. I don't think I missed any from my list. I'm scanning. But it also contained games like The Last of Us, Beyond Two Souls, Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, Rayman Legends. I have here Splinter Cell Blacklist. I think I just rattled off 3 Ubisoft games in a row. Battlefield 4, Payday 2, and then some indies just to kind of round it up, because this really was a time where, between Fez and some of the other games we talked about last week and this year, this was kind of a real heyday, for this surge of indie games that the kind of online platforms on the consoles, as well as, of course, the PC were enabling. So I list here Outlast, which I think technically is a indie game, kind of a horror game. Antichamber, sort of a puzzler, sort of weird in that Fez way as well. The Stanley Parable, Papers, Please, and Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, which was by Starbreeze, but is I think merits special mention because it was I believe the first game in that kind of co-op spirit by Josef Ferris, who has gone on to found Hazelight Studios. Again, we actually need to get back to playing that game we were playing.
Yeah.
It Takes Two, which has been a lot of fun. But we're not here to talk about that. What do you see from 2013, or do you remember? Well, you might not remember 2013 too well because you were shipping, but what springs to mind?
Yeah, I noticed Dead Rising 3 on there too, to be honest. But yeah, I think
Which I
it is.
mentioned, but you know.
You did, yeah. Sorry, okay. Yeah, I think the main thing that I would say is just to echo what you said as far as it being in that era of crossover with indie games, having I don't know if you want to say a heyday, but it was like, there was a big wave happening still in this sort of like 5-ish year span, and I'd say this was maybe in the middle of it. But then you still had these, if you listen to a lot of the ones you rattled off, a lot of them, as far as the AAA kind of bigger games, a lot of them were sequels. There's a lot of numbers in those titles for the bigger games. And so we talked about this before, though, that phenomenon where you have the big studios spending a lot of money doing lower risk things like big sequels. Maybe you could say something like Tomb Raider is an exception, but also not at the same time. And then you have these indie games that are doing some pretty big trailblazing as well, of the ones that you mentioned. So this one and others, I think Papers, Please is maybe another example. So yeah, and just for the record, I didn't stay till the end of Tomb Raider, so I wasn't shipping that. I
Oh,
was
that's
actually
right. Yeah.
at that time. I guess I would have been back at LucasArts my second time. So yeah, but the team was hard at work shipping Tomb Raider, friends of ours. But yeah,
Right. Right. Yeah. Sorry, my
yeah.
mistake.
So no. So yeah, that's it's an interesting time, that whole era. I'm glad we're playing the indie games to talk about that era because it's such a specific, thing. It's still going on, of course, but I think the wave was really cresting at that point.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to talk about that now because I think we're about to see another wave of it, and we are seeing another
Yeah.
wave of it. You know, some of the top games of the last year or two have been small teams, independent teams. From like one person bands to teams of more like 30. I'm thinking of that Clair Obscure
Yep.
game that has just came out a couple weeks ago maybe, but also like Blueprints and Animal Well and Balatro and just all sorts of like little, again, another sort of indie fix. I think right now that's happening in part because of industry issues. And I don't really remember too clearly back at the time, but didn't LucasArts close in 2013? Or was that 2012? Well, I guess it would have been
Uh,
2013.
yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it might have been maybe. I'm trying to think of when we moved. When we moved up to Seattle, and it was yeah. So you're right. I think I might have already been at 343 at that point. And so yeah, they closed. Because that's why I left LucasArts, right? Because it closed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the end of an era for sure.
Yeah, I was trying to remember what the yeah, cuz I was I was working at, that was the year I left Bethesda as well. So it was kind of like a time where I was also kind of going out on my own. I've talked about why recently with some folks. That interview may see the light of day at some point with Bio and Calamity. But yeah, I was also kind of going out and doing some different things, more independent stuff. And, like I said, I worked on Tacoma, uh, and, as their next game, which I guess was 2017. So it's definitely a time where I think both because of that, the movie that we talked about, indie game, the movie, and just sort of the success and the sort of wave of game developers who had some experience and maybe saw an opening for something a little different that could be smaller budget. We'll talk about that a lot in connection with this game. They had this opportunity, I think, to uh, kind of chart their own course, hopefully get a decent deal from one of the console holders. Maybe this game was made in Unity, so there were also new tools being available that had pretty good terms. Like Unity, you basically bought a license for the software but paid no revenue share, so that was attractive to developers. They have kind of muddied those waters in years since, but at least at the time that was kind of a cool thing as well. So you just had the opportunity for a lot of sort of different sorts of things. I don't remember if Antichamber was done that way or not. He may have coded that himself. I can't recall. It might be on an engine. I don't remember. I was kind of looking at the few indie games we have mentioned here. But in any case, it was an opportunity, and people were taking advantage of it, and that's why we had this kind of wave. So let's talk a little bit about Fulbright. It was founded by three folks who had worked together on Minerva's Den, the DLC for BioShock 2. So another tie to BioShock. Which was, of course, a game that had, as we talked about at the time, and when we talked about the original BioShock, a game with audio logs to tell, and environmental storytelling to tell the story of what had happened, somewhere beneath the sea. And those three, and in addition to Kate Craig, a 3D modeler, went out to make this game. They moved to Portland from Marin County. They rented a house together, and they they lived and worked on this game all the time. And what they had noted, Minerva's Den is kind of well known for being a DLC with a particularly rich story for a particular character and like the sort of people around him, who was portrayed in the audio logs of that DLC by Carl Lumbly, who would be in Tacoma as well as the computer voice in that game. And they kind of reached a different level of storytelling in Minerva's Den. A lot of people think of it as kind of the high point of BioShock storytelling, in that kind of audio log way. And they saw an opportunity to make a story that was its own thing. So kind of a cool thing to do. I think, working at 2K Marin, my understanding is that was kind of I don't think it's around anymore, kind of a hard place to work. Um, a lot of long hours on BioShock 2 as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Hangar 13 might still be there. I'm not positive on that. I feel like that they still have something going, but yeah, I mean, it was in that traditional approach to things, right? And there was also, I think we talked about it probably because we played BioShock 2 as a bonus episode, I think, right? I remember playing BioShock 2. I don't remember why, but there was some contention there, I think, with Ken Levine and kind of them taking over BioShock 2, but he wasn't really fully involved. And then there's always sort of the ego comes into play when it comes to like something like Minerva's Den being so well received, but not, not being the original team. doing
Right.
better than, kind of like a little bit like Fallout New Vegas.
Yeah, I was
Which I
gonna
know
say,
you
let me
have
tell you about a little
you
game made
yeah, you
by
have
folks
opinions
at
about, but yeah,
Obsidian or whatever.
yeah. It's on my mind because the second season of the show is going to be in New Vegas, so everyone's kind of freaking out
Oh,
about
is it?
that. Yeah, yeah. They tease it at the end of the first season. Spoiler. Um,
That's
he's
okay.
arriving.
I'm not gonna
Yeah.
I'm not gonna watch that one.
It's a good show. It's a good show. I was very surprised. I went in very skeptical, but I was very
No,
surprised.
I've heard it's great. It's just yeah, I've seen how the sausage is made, and I haven't played a Bethesda game since the last one I shipped. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
been it's just
Except for Morrowind.
right,
Um,
right, right. Sorry, not one that has come out since the one I shipped.
yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, and I haven't played Minerva's Den, and it always meant to because I'd heard so many good things about it, and until I was reading up on this game, I'd forgotten that connection, and it'll relate to one of my topics and takeaways in the future episode, but of just the extreme focus, what you get. One of the advantages, you still have to execute well, and it still has to be good content, of course, in the end of the day, high quality. But what you get when you do have such an extreme focus, you can really make sure that everything you do and everything you put in there is, you can put a lot of time and love into it. When you're not, in a BioShock game trying to make a good shooter and a good light RPG and a good story and all the things that AAA games have to do all at once with an enormous team. So,
Yeah,
and I think your story about them moving away and renting a house and like all that, like that feels very much like the indie spirit that we're talking about with this series as well.
yeah,
Of like these AAA developers who are like, nope, let's
yeah.
try this,
Right,
and
right.
let's all move and let's all work in the same place and all, that's like seems like almost like a sitcom or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or a reality show. Wasn't there somebody was going to
There
try
wa-
to do a game design or game development reality show?
there was a QA one, but yeah, you might be right. There might have been a development one too. I mean,
Yeah, there
there's the
was,
fictional
and
one,
it
Mythic
it
Quest.
crashed and burned really badly. I remember it was in the headlines, um, and there were lawsuits and things. I don't remember what it was called, but folks can look that up. That was a while back as well. Yeah, so it was. We should talk about some of their other, like, you keep bringing up a particular look, you call it a location based entertainment. I just think of it as a show. I know they saw Sleep No More, which was in New York, which was it was a play seen from the inside. It took up a whole, I want to say, 5-story building. I've seen it as well. It's unfortunately closed now. But there was this building, and you would go in. The first maybe floor or 2 floors were kind of like there was a club, I think, on one of the floors, like a bar, and a place where you could sit after your experience and have a drink and talk and listen to some period music. But it was the Scottish play, told from sort of inside, where it was multiple floors that you could move around however you wanted to and investigate whatever you saw. It was entirely built out. Like, I remember being in some office that just had like reams of paper. Most of it had nonsense on it. There was like a desk and like, weird lighting, and like it was all pretty dim in there. There was a whole floor that was like a bombed out, I don't know, neighborhood, we'll just say, because it wasn't set at the same time as that play. But and it just had like this like, you are there, you might see an actor come through and like follow the actor for a while to see what happens with that actor and what interactions occur, or you might just move on. Like, you might decide not to follow the actors. It's hard. I think you have to maybe go more than once to kind of get the full experience without some serious prep. But it's a cool being there kind of thing. You also mentioned one that I haven't seen, but that I think you have.
Yeah, I've only done one. I'll explain why I thought of it. And Sleep No More makes sense. I've always heard about those two. I did see Antenna Theater in Marin, which is similar to Sleep No More, where there's it's a self-driven performance. I would say, um, uh, and they went on to do other things like the tour of Alcatraz. They did like the audio tour. They made a different kind of business model out of their work. But so I love that stuff. But yeah, so I was going to mention Meow Wolf, which there's a series of them. I think there's 4 locations at least. Santa Fe is the one that I went to, which was the original. I think there's one in Denver, there's one in LA, and then maybe Chicago. I remember where they all are. There's at least those 3 though. But uh yeah, and the reason I call it location based, and I think it applies to this um, better than what my memory of Antenna Theater was and what your description is, because I wouldn't actually call it a performance. And the reason I call it location based, which is maybe the term you'd use for like Disneyland rides or something, is that there aren't performers um, in Meow Wolf. Meow Wolf, there are no like actors. It's all just a location that you interact with fully, and you kind of, obviously there's lots of other guests there, so there are people there, but you're just exploring on your own, and it's all just kind of there, and a lot of it's interactive, and you can fool with stuff, and it's all tangible, things that you can interact with. But the reason I bring the one up in Santa Fe, I don't actually know if all the Meow Wolves are the same storyline. I would guess they're not, because it's done by a community of artists who I would expect to do a different story every location. But it's been going since 2008, and I just had happened to be able to go to the one in Santa Fe last fall, and with a bunch of other game developers. So it's very, very interesting to talk about afterwards. And it was, I think I don't remember if I mentioned it on the podcast before, but it was very, not to be overly dramatic, but it was transformative for me because I felt like I was inside of a video game, especially one like a walking simulator, because there were puzzles. This one in particular is about a family. They've recreated this house. There's also, by the way, a documentary about Meow Wolf if you want to look it up. Apparently, George R. R. Martin, who I guess is from New Mexico, um, somehow got connected to this artist community, and then he funded the original Meow Wolf. So he bought this bowling alley for them to do this in. And so this is where the location is. You go inside, and they've taken up this whole bowling alley, and it's very, very difficult to describe. And I almost encourage people not to go like look at YouTube walkthroughs or something with people filming as they go, because you'll spoil too much. I'm sure the documentary's safe, but um, inside this, bowling alley, which has a high ceiling, quite large, they've recreated this house, this suburban house, and it's not unlike the one in this game. And there's secret passages, there's puzzles, there's combination locks to open, there's a lot of found narrative. There are some essentially audio logs that, of course, are like speakers in the walls or whatever. And it tells the story of the family. Now, it's not. There's a lot more metaphysical stuff going on. I think I told Brett offline that it also reminded me of Control. Like, imagine Control without the combat, but you're in it. Like, there's even some, I won't even spoil it, but there's some pretty wacky stuff that happens in it that reminded me of Control, if you know what I'm saying, because Control did some pretty amazing stuff with the way that they told story. Um, but it just, like, when I was playing this game, it made me think of it because of the house, because of the family narrative. There were like obviously every family member had secrets. Um, it was a lot about psychology and kind of the emotions that all the different family members were going through. And it's not the same story at all as far as like what this focuses on, but it just, it's like literal walking simulator as you're walking around yourself. So maybe think of it, and it's very, very indirectly related. But I did want to mention it for anyone who if you live in Santa Fe and you play video games, you probably already have been there. But if you ever have the opportunity in the other locations, I I was very impressed and like emotional multiple times. And you're there with strangers, of course, right? It was packed when we were there, so a lot of people are mingling about. But yeah, anyway, that's what Meow Wolf. I have a friend who I worked with at Imagineering, and she's sort of retired now, but she was an Imagineer at Walt Disney for like 30 years, and she does work with them now. So it's sort of like in that same space, right? People who work on Disneyland rides kind of work with Meow Wolf. So
That's cool. Yeah. Maybe I will get down to Santa Fe when it. I mean, I have not. I don't know that I've ever been to New Mexico. Is that true? Might be true. I mean, maybe to pass through, but I don't. I don't think I've ever stopped there. So it's definitely a place, and I could ping George R. Martin about. I guess he's got some book series he's been working on. People are waiting on.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Um, not to trigger anyone who's a reader of those books. Yeah, so those are some, between those are some sort of digital precedents and in-person precedents that are worth remarking on. I don't remember them mentioning Meow Wolf, but if I ever run into them again, we'll ask. One of the things you talked about, and probably the place to get started is, sort of as an indie team, they're very focused, right, in kind of carving away a lot of things that would be in the AAA experience and focusing on the one thing that they're trying to do. How would you describe their success at that?
Um, it's an interesting question. I so you described sort of the genesis of them forming as a team, and they clearly took something. Maybe we get to talk to somebody about it, but they clearly took something from a specific part of a BioShock game, which I think we all, even when we played BioShock 1, we talked a lot about the genius of the audio files and how it was an economical way to take the found object collectible and make it into story related stuff. So I just think the concept of taking a house, focusing on one house, which we've talked about at various games we've played, like Resident Evil, gives you this extreme focus. Um, and then choosing the audio file specifically. Now, there's a lot of other found collectibles that you can read and put two and two together, of course, to put additional, I guess I'd say, subplots together. But the constraints that I assume come from, well, I guess we know a little bit about those constraints ourselves now because of our day jobs currently. I guess technically we're indie. Um, uh, the
Sure
constraints that
feels that way.
they, yeah, yeah, fair. The constraints that they clearly put on themselves, which is an extreme, from my experience, an extreme amount of discipline comes with that. To really, because I guess to come at it from a different direction to answer your question, I actually was surprised at how minimalistic this game was because I'd heard so much about it over the years. I had forgotten about the Minerva's Den connection, but then remembered upon research. And then so kind of like I will say I built it up in my head probably more than I should have. And that's not a criticism because I still really love the game. And was very, I'll explain it later, but yeah, very impacted by it. And so when I started the game, I was like, oh, wow, this is actually not what I thought it was at all. This is actually very, very simple and minimalistic and focused and still very like quality driven and putting its effort in the right places. They chose their thing, as you said before, and they doubled down on that thing. And we talked a little bit about it with Fez, I guess I'd say too. Once they had their concept of what the hook was, kind of everything could kind of unravel from that. And I'm sure that every indie game has some sort of revelation like that where they choose their battles. And when you were working on a really, really big AAA project, let's just say the constraints are not always obvious or there.
Right.
I literally had a conversation on one of the games. I won't name the game or the people or the person, but I had a conversation with somebody at some point where we were talking about a problem on one of the big games I worked on. And they literally said, "Oh, well, just pull the money lever."
Yeah.
And I was like, "What did you say?" And they literally meant it. They're like, just, you know what? To solve your problem, just spend more money.
Yeah.
And to me, that was antithetical to what my job was. My job is not to spend more money, really. My job is about spending money, but that's not my goal. And so I was trying to find a constrained way to solve the problem. But anyway, long story short, it's like when you start embark on a game like this, that those aren't options. You know
Yeah.
that you have to create your own box. And I was just like, to be honest, blown away with the discipline in the game, that it really was this one thing. And I guess I went in not believing it. I was like,
Yeah,
nah, I can't do that.
what did you expect? I mean, I'm curious. I mean, it's hard for me to picture. I'm asking because like it's hard for me to even remember like the
Mm,
expectations of things. Like a couple of years after, well, I guess like a year after this, I was talking with the Firewatch folks about their idea for their game, and they were like, "Well, you're out in the woods, and there's this story going on, but a lot of it, is you kind of having this conversation with a person you can't actually interact with directly. It's all over this radio. Is there a game in that?" And I was like, "Well, totally. I mean, because Gone Home came out last year. Like, there's totally a game in that. So it's just hard for me because it's been more than a decade now, of having and playing these things. Um, it's hard for me to
yeah,
remember what it was like. That's why, like, what my expectations were coming in, et cetera. So what were
right.
yours? Even knowing it was an indie game, you had more expectations than I think I realized.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know it was more. It was just different. And I think it was just, it actually relates to one of the other topics, so it'll be a good segue, but it relates to maybe some of um, my own desires about video games, as people know, some of the things that I love, genres that I love. I think going in based on sort of things that people would tell me and sort of the tone of some of the marketing material, or what have you, that there would be more puzzle, like more legitimate first person puzzle type things. And, to be honest, true to my initial expectations, as I say, for the first 30 minutes of the game or so, maybe even an hour plus of the game, I was like, is this a horror game? Am I supposed to be scared? Like, because there's just enough, like there's creaks and then you kind of unravel some of the story a
You
little bit
arrive in a
more.
thunderstorm, you can't escape.
It's a spooky atmosphere. So I was like, okay, clearly I've played Amnesia. I know what this is going on here, so that's where my expectations were. And I think even to be honest, I will even say from the main menu screen, the artwork on the main menu screen to me looks like a horror game. And I was like, okay, or at least a spooky mystery.
Right.
And so I was going in with like, okay, there's going to be some occult stuff. And of course, when I found the first secret door, and there's actually this, and then there's history. There's even a pentagram on the table toward the end.
Yeah, that's
We
true.
mentioned a crucifix. So it's like,
There's mentions
okay,
of
this is where
ghosts as well.
ghosts, paranormal. They're even searching for ghosts.
X-Files
But the
poster.
X-Files, yeah, exactly. But the funny thing about it is, it's this will be a little bit on a tangent, but the great thing about all that stuff is that it's so damn authentic, because all kids that age do that stuff. Like,
Right.
oh, this is a video
Yeah,
game.
the
Yeah, it's
Ouija
going to be
board.
Oh my God, it's so relatable, right? Like
Yeah.
I loved looking for ghosts when I was that age, or using Ouija boards. So it was like, oh, okay, this isn't, by the end, I'm like, oh, okay, this isn't a horror game, but it very easily could have been, you know.
Yeah.
But they
Yeah.
showed restraint, and yet still had topics that were believable to me, because that is stuff that kids. That's probably why I like horror games today. Is like, oh yeah, ghosts, sure. Can I go do that more safely in a video game? Sure. Um, so yeah, so that was it. And then the other one that was obvious to me was that, there would have been more like legitimate puzzles, which there were times and I was like, oh, is this the puzzle? Because they had combination locks,
Yeah.
which
Sure.
is like a light puzzle. There's those you find in one of the basement rooms. There's the bells that ring from the old sort of servant services, the bells that ring to the different rooms. And I don't know if you remember that, or found those this time, but and I was like, oh, okay, here's the puzzle, here's the puzzle. So I'm ringing the bells, and I'm like, this bell goes to that one. Oh, that bell's broken. So I imposed all this stuff on these. All they are meant to represent an interactive real house that would have
Right.
had these.
Right.
But I'm imposing all of these video game isms on them. So I thought that was kind of a fascinating thing for myself, at least. So those are the two categories where I was coming in. I was like, oh, that's this game. And then it turned out
Yeah.
not to be
Yeah.
that at all.
I mean, it does feel like it could be an escape room kind of
Yeah.
scenario, right? In that, you effectively have come to a place, there's nobody there, and you can't escape, right? So it's like, yeah, I could definitely see the sort of expecting puzzles and all of that. And I think because of the sort of spookiness of the location, I mean, which is also a real thing. If you've ever been to a place like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a scenario where that would have happened for me, but like, I don't know, babysitting in somebody's house for the first time, especially older houses in New England, that, um, or even just being in a house where you're kind of left a little bit more unattended, visiting family or something like that. As a kid, like, houses are spooky. Like, they make weird sounds.
Yeah.
They, windows rattle. Connecting that to the Ouija board. My aunt and uncle. This was my grandmother's sister. So technically, I guess cousins, but something like that. But anyway, these cousins and their parents lived in this old house, and they had a kitchen. They had a kitchen door that would just kind of close because of the way the house had settled. It just would naturally just close on its own, like a hardwood door with some glass in it, like to the bed in the kitchen. And one night we were in there with a Ouija board and with my cousin, who's actually my father's first cousin, and we're asking questions and like, make us, if there's somebody here, make a sign. And he reaches over, none of us see this, and he shoves the door so it shuts. And everybody freaked, so it's like, there's just something like, especially when you're a kid, where it's, you're very naive, gullible, you want to believe, as does Mulder. And so there's just something about especially a house you don't know, and all of its little mysteries, that is just genuinely spooky in reality. Your own house can be spooky, under the right conditions. So yeah, I can definitely relate, and they play into it for sure. And there is the bloody, the apparently bloody bathroom, that turns out to be a
Yeah.
literal red herring, as it were, and things like that. So they know, and they are leaning into that. But especially in old houses that way, like,
Yeah.
moving into an older house, you don't know all the sounds that it makes. When it cools down at night or whatever, it, makes all these clicking noises. Everything contracts, and yeah, it's a great representation of that experience. But yeah, the puzzle expectation, I think, also ties in with that because of your Resident Evils and whatever. because that's often a big non-combat part of the gameplay of those games, is like find these pieces to light these candles or whatever, to do the spooky things, to open the gates, to find keys that aren't keys, as it were.
Right. Well, and there were locked doors and there were combinations, and the thing that's I think that the fascinating thing about that I think is going to probably come up with talking, because we're going to probably play some other walking simulators, or first person exploration games, as I've seen them called too. But I think the interesting, and it makes me want to finally play Firewatch as well, because I kind of want to compare them. But um, it's interesting. Like, how do I put this? We have so many video gameisms and tropes and conventions that we have imposed upon video games to kind of like split the difference between reality and fantasy and fiction. And this game in particular, we're going to play Dear Esther next, probably, and that's a little bit different, is my memory of that. But this game in particular, because I mostly play fantasy and sci-fi based games, I know there are like the Life is Strange kind of series and stuff that are not about supernatural as much, I think.
Yes, they are.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know there are video games out there that don't have supernatural in them. But
Yes.
long story
Yes,
short, for Gone Home, it's interesting to play a game that has basically stripped out most of the video game isms, intentionally so, and the only thing that really is remaining is the interactivity the player has, right? Meaning it's still a video game. I would still consider it one, but it doesn't it doesn't assume certain conventions like mechanics. Like, other than physics, it doesn't really have any systems. There it's really, again, a very disciplined, focused experience that I would still call a video game. But because of who I am and what kind of player I am, I'm so used to a set of expectations for what I'm going to play, and so what, by over the course of time, other than I guess the exploration and finding quote unquote hidden objects like collectibles, um, you kind of it's funny, I didn't think about this until just now, but similar for me, at least similar to Fez, I kind of had to retrain my brain as I was playing the game, because it wasn't that, it was just live in this house that's actually trying to be fairly realistically represented, or I'll say naturalistically represented, and just let it be what it is. And and even though it's a short game, I'm talking about this like I played hours and hours. I think it took me 2.5 hours to do everything, um, almost everything. Because I got over that hump and realized, I think, eventually what it was, I think maybe the impact for me was much greater by the end. Um, I wasn't like, I didn't have a disappointment or something.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing, just to put on my discussion hat, is I recall probably in 2014, Steve Gaynor gave a talk. It might have been Steve and Carla gave a talk at GDC about the systems in Gone Home. So I will put a link to that in the show notes. I wish I had time to watch it again, because I had a feeling this was going to come up, because he does describe it as having more systems than you think, but not typically in the way we think of systems. And I think that there are, the sort of being able to pick up and put back things in the house, or not, like you can just drop them or throw them on the floor. I know one player, back in the day, gathered up like all the toilet supplies in the whole house and put them in the first floor bathroom. Like, you can do that stuff if you want. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but you can. so there are kind of those systems, and of course the way they're doling out the information, which comes through interaction and sometimes picking things up and examining them, and all of that are all mechanical things, right, that you're doing that are beyond just like walking around first person. You can even crouch, I guess, if you want, which adds a layer of sort of like getting to places you're not supposed to. It's certainly not a deep layer, but it's like searching under the bed. I don't know if you did that, but on the mother's side of the bed,
Yeah.
there's the book of poems, Leaves of Grass, that she has borrowed from the forestry, the consultant they have, or another, I guess, a different
Rick.
park ranger Rick, who is visiting to help with something. I'm not going to mention what, because it's in the quiz. I have a Greenbrier family quiz we can do a little while
Okay.
to
Yeah.
just to
No,
see
and
what things you discovered, I guess, is really what it's about. But
well, and also retained probably too. But
yeah.
yeah, no,
I
and I
mean,
didn't
I
mean
would
to say
hardly
that they're.
expect you to remember a movie's worth of information a few days after you played it. So
Yeah, and I didn't mean to say there were not systems and mechanics in the game. I just, you know what I mean. I just meant more that they're not in I guess in a Hollow Knight or something, right?
it's
Like
not systems
they
forward.
they
Yeah.
they are the point in a
Yeah.
way, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
everything else kind of follows from the gameplay. But this isn't really a gameplay kind of game. This is an experiential kind of game and storytelling kind of game, which I appreciate. And I think I knew that kind of intellectually because it was called a walking simulator, but anyway. Um, and to be honest, the through line story, which we'll need to get to at some point too, we don't have to get into the details, but the through line story that is the main journal from Katie's sister Sam was also was very unexpected for me. I had a feeling, I had an inkling because I knew the cassette tapes was part of the marketing material, so I was like, okay, there's going to be music. I thought actually the voice lines were going to be on cassette tapes.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. I mean, that's a reasonable
because
expectation coming from BioShock.
yeah, exactly, and just like cassette, because of the '90s was one of its hooks was like it's very specifically set in a time and an era, and they very lovingly crafted that era, and of course cassette tapes were part of that. So and I being alive at that time, just barely though, I was just barely alive. I remember cassette tapes. So
I've read about the era in books.
but um the regardless of the method that they chose to tell Sam's story, the content and the performance and the writing of the story was very unexpected for me, and I think that's why it hit home so effectively for me.
All right. Well, let's move on to my quiz now, and then we can talk about the storytelling,
Yeah,
aspects. Okay, so I'll give you the softball first. What was the name of the family's cat?
Mittens.
Nice. Okay, good. What is the age difference between Katie and Sam?
Oh, that I don't think I know the exact number. I'd have to guess.
Okay. Well, you can guess, and we'll see if you guess right.
Well, so the age difference, I'm going to say 6 years.
3 years.
Okay. That's too far off.
Too far off. Yeah, I mean, Sam
Oh yeah, that doesn't
is
make sense because Sam's in high school now, and
right, and
yeah,
Katie's in
and
college.
Katie, so
Yeah,
it'd have to be like 4 or less or something.
it's 3. Yeah. What family planning method do the Greenbriers practice?
I remember some family planning saying, but what's the family planning method? Ooh, yeah, I don't remember the name of it. I remember seeing some chart or calendar or something, but yeah.
Okay, no, there was an item in a drawer that would have giving this away that Katie
Okay.
found gross.
Katie found gross. No, I don't know.
It was
I
a
feel like I
Nero
know.
brand condom in her
Oh,
father's
oh, okay. All
dresser.
right. Yes, I did find that, but I misunderstood the question, maybe.
Okay. Let's see. This one's right up your alley. What delicate forestry operation was Janice Greenbrier overseeing in the fall of 1994?
Oh, it's a controlled burn. I mean, come
Nice.
on.
I knew you'd get that one. Let's see. I should put
That's,
check marks here. X check. Okay. Um, where
I can tell
did?
you a lot about controlled burns, by the way.
I know. I put that one in as another softball for you. I knew you would have picked up on that. Where did Sam Greenbrier see Pulp Fiction?
Oh, shoot. Um, the I wanted to say the Commodore, but it's not.
Very close. Very close.
Yeah, shoot, something like
Call.
that. Huh? Oh, huh? Wait,
Call.
Paul, Paul? Uh,
Coliseum.
oh, the Coliseum. Got it, got it. Yeah, I did find a ticket stub. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
and I found the ticket stub for Earth, Wind, and Fire. By the way, that was stuck in the vent,
Yes. Yeah.
which was
Yeah.
a great little tidbit.
Yeah. Um, how old was Oscar Mason when he died?
Oh, that's a good question. No, I'm sure I saw it and read it, but I don't remember. I'm not
Okay.
good with numbers.
That's true.
Um, yeah, I don't remember.
He was 60. Um, and how is he related to the Greenbriers?
He is Stephen, is that the dad's name?
No,
Stephen?
Terry.
Terry, that's right. He is Terry's uncle
That's
or great
correct.
uncle.
His uncle.
Yeah.
What magazine do both Terry and Sam Greenbrier have hidden issues of?
Gentleman
Nice. That's it. That's all.
magazine?
That's the whole thing, gentlemen. It's just
Okay.
gentlemen. And then, oh, this one's a funny one. On what assignment did Caitlin receive a check plus and Sam
Yeah.
receive a see me?
Yeah. Yeah, that is top freaking notch storytelling there. I
Yeah,
gotta say, because it says so much about the two characters without knowing
without
them.
the
It
explicit
was, yeah,
saying.
yeah. I mean, it was an assignment about breaking down the biology of the menstrual cycle,
That's
and
right. Yeah.
also, yeah, might have been spermicidal cycle too. I don't remember. Yeah, but the
Yeah,
menstrual
it
cycle.
was the menstrual cycle. I especially loved Sam's very strange and dark, twisted recollection. Okay, so I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 questions, and you got 5.5 right. Not too bad. Solid D.
That's way better than I thought I'd get.
You did pretty well. Did pretty well. I mean, I almost want to give you the Commodore because you were very close. So anyway, um, the only reason I brought that up is because that's the kind of narrative richness that is here, and that's actually is explicitly why I had the menstrual cycle one as the last one, is because it does so much work in character development. But all of these things, like how you discover them, how they are elaborated and reinforced later, like, is the storytelling of the game. And I don't think really any of this is. Oh, and we should maybe talk about Oscar and Terry a little bit too. Maybe put a little content warning around that for young listeners in particular. Um, all of this stuff is just reinforced by things you find in the environment. Sometimes the reactions in the flavor text of the pickup, like most things are just pick up, put back. But some of them are ew, gross, or dad. The Gentleman magazine in particular. That's a very funny one because you find his in the library or the den or something, and then you find hers in her locker, and she says that she's like, Katie. So it's like there's just so much going on in simple ways. They're really, one of the things you really always admire is sort of the economy of using systems, and being really elegant and efficient with them. And I think the storytelling delivery mechanisms here are really elegantly, you know, utilized, and portray a really complex web of relationships and history that is deeply impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as far as any game that has narrative-based collectibles, this is a masterclass game that anyone working on one of those games, even if you're working on Assassin's Creed or something, like needs to play this game to understand sort of like it's the individual assets, but I would say something that relates to another topic that we may or may not get to today is the sort of ordering or possible ordering of finding them. The menstrual cycle one is a good example because of the way that you find them and where you find the second one. Like you don't put two and two together because you don't find them together, right?
Right.
And you find the second one from Katie's, which of course is from her high school years, which is in the past. So of course you find it in the attic, I think, or the
It's
basement,
in the
and
basement, but yeah. um
but
yeah, I mean,
it's put away. You know what I mean? It's like
exactly, yeah.
it's one of those things that historically would have been put away by the family, and you don't so you're not expecting to find sort of its partner. You know what I mean? But it does like you said, the economy of that is really brilliant. All the notes, which also is another nod to the 90s, because cell phones were not a thing for kids. And so it's sort of this transportation about how kids would communicate back and forth, but it's also a very great, really good device for a video game. Because it's a found object that you don't have to have VO recordings for, right? They chose their VO wisely, right? They put the VO, which is expensive, um, and more difficult to do, in the right place, with the journals. And then they told the journal story in a very unorthodox way, kind of non linearly, but out of time order. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Because I mean, you could find them in different orders, of course, but you don't find the journal they're from until the end. So
Right.
it's a really kind of fascinating sort of doling out of that information in context, even though that's not when she actually read them. Um, so it's a very intriguing to me, like, device about how they dole those audio. Because in BioShock, it's my memory is generally they're fairly linearly delivered, and they are in the context where you find them. You're just hearing them from the past. Very rarely do they do them kind of out of time order. I think that would confuse a lot of people. Um, but this one, because it was their thing, they took some liberties, I think, with that, and it made the impact of finding the journal at the end, I think, better, way better for me, because I wasn't confused, but I was sort of intrigued why these voice lines are playing when I'm picking up these certain objects. And it says it's a journal entry, but I'm like, what do you mean? Why
Right.
is it a journal entry? And then
Right.
you kind of, it's a little bit of, or maybe a lot of it of an aha moment at the end where you're like, oh my God, this, this is, it all culminates, sort of two narrative threads that are coming together, but you don't know they're coming together until the end. Another example being the um, the answering machine messages from Lonnie that you find very quickly, and it's not Sam. So you're like, who is that?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have no idea. You have no idea who that is, and you're
Yeah.
concerned for this person. Of course, you think that she's in trouble or something, and then to find and then to find out later what it actually means at the end, or toward the end, is like, no, actually, very basically at the end. Um, just brilliant. I have, so I'll just reveal it here. I have, I think I've cried at more games than these three, but there's three specifically, well, three now specifically that I remember very vividly. And so this is now the third one. And, I don't know. Maybe I was just, by myself playing on my Steam Deck, kind of
Final
like
Fantasy
playing it.
9.
No. Um, uh, I played it in one sitting. It was very much like the book you can't put down for me. I literally played it last night, and I was intending to play for an hour or something, and I just was like, oh, I got to finish. And the second to last journal I got, which was the one kind of talking about her going up to the attic, and she was just kind of like she was missing Lonnie and stuff, and just was going to lay down. I was sobbing. I was literally sobbing. Now, maybe I got a lot on my mind, whatever, but it really hit me. It hit me hard, and it was one of those sneak up on you slow builds because those journal entries are so damn good. Like it built up, and it's like a good movie as well, where you're so emotionally invested, and then they throw something at you where you're like, you don't expect it, and then of course the waterworks. For me, as you know, I'm easy to the waterworks. Uh,
But
yeah,
not when
it was
playing games.
well, not as easy because as everyone always jokes about, I just don't think it's a priority for video games, unfortunately, to investigate that area of emotion for people, and it's not good. It should be more, and maybe I should seek out more of them. But and the other two games are very different from this game when it comes to the ones that really hit me hard. um but and for different
Have
reasons.
you
But
said what the other two are?
not not in this episode. So the the one I probably did when we played one of them. So Shadow of the Colossus, when
Mm.
when Argo, is it Argo or Agro? I always forget.
It's
When
Agro.
Argo,
Yeah, it's Agro.
Agro,
Agro.
yeah. When the horse, when your companion, quote unquote, dies. There's some spoiler there, but the first time it happens, you're like, I was crushed. I'm an animal person anyway. So that one
I
was
went
the
back like 3 times and tried to make that jump.
yeah. I think we talked about that at the time. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
I
sure we
think
did. Yeah.
I hope everybody with a with a heart did. And then yeah. Anyway, there's a sort of a brilliant aspect of that game where there's a conclusion to that later. So no spoilers there, but it's old game. And then the other one, which is a little on the nose, maybe you wouldn't be surprised by. I don't think I've told you this, but Last of Us 2.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
that is an amazing game from a storytelling perspective. It is, the AAA blockbuster movie version of that. But after two long games, committed to these characters, where those games go, well, where the second one goes specifically. And to be honest, my memory of it was kind of similar to this game. And I think they're actually, to come to think of it, there's some pretty big parallels to these two games because of Ellie and Sam.
Yeah.
They have some similar, similar challenges. Uh, that It really was just the culmination in Last of Us 2. It wasn't like an event per se. It was just the end of the game. The game ended, and it's just like lost it because it was just such a roller coaster ride, and so much had happened to these characters, and you're so conflicted. So yeah, and with Gone Home, just yeah, it was another one that played, I think, against my expectations because I really didn't know that it was going to go so deeply into something, that was so important and serious. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this one hit me similarly in 2013. I mean, I mean, and now I'm prepared, I'm guarded against it. But when you're not prepared for it, it can definitely hit really, really hard. And, you know, I know you thought I was joking, but Final Fantasy IX was my first. So,
That's right. No, for me it wouldn't have been, but I do think I remember you telling that story.
yeah. Just because the ending, it's a loop story as well, which are like my favorite types of stories. So it really hit home hard. We are past an hour. I want to touch briefly on the sort of 90s of it all. We've kind of lightly touched on it, but I guess we'll kind of finish there. This is we've already kind of touched on it being very much a game of its time, like, or a representation of that time, I should say. What if anything particularly stood out to you that made it so 90s?
Well, I mean, it's kind of an obvious one for me, but it's just I think the technology, right? They nailed whether it be the VHS tapes, like in my family, right? We also had a bunch of recorded VHS tapes with with Sharpie titles on them, right? The reason that I got to see Alien so many times as a youngster was because my uncle recorded it, probably illegally, and we had a VHS, and he was the first one in our family to get a VHS player. And so I watched that thing over and thus my doomed my future as a young kid to watch Alien over and over again. But it's like that the shelves of tapes, the cassette tapes, the mix tapes. Oh my God, I forgot to even mention the collectible of the tape cases that have the set list inside, but
Right,
they
yeah.
have they have the physics swiveling of the case
Yeah,
like
so you
those
can
did.
see the inside of the case. Oh, it's
Oh my,
perfect.
it's
Yeah,
so
it's
brilliant.
perfect.
And
Yeah.
so, but it puts you in that time as well. So all of the TVs, all the different, so for me, that was a lot of it. The X-Files, of course, because I'm a big X-Files fan. And like the things that were hot at the time. So yeah, I think that um it was another, whether it was, I don't know what the inspiration was, whether it was just because they grew up in the 90s or not, or if they chose it intentionally for other reasons, but I would call it, for me, another constraint that they chose to double down on, right? And to make
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it's like a rule set, right? It's like when you're creating a fantasy world, it's like, okay, what's the rule set? It's like, okay, well, it's the 90s. And so that answers a lot of questions for you immediately. And you can now create an aesthetic that is very specific as long as you commit. And they really did. So I really
Yeah.
appreciated that.
They did specifically pick the 90s. I mean, they were living in Portland making this game about Oregon. Um and they are all, basically roughly 10 years younger than we are, so they are, more 90s
Mm,
people than 80s people. And so that was definitely it. But of course, the lack of cell phones and email, making everything, physical objects, correspondence is written down, and things like that. It makes all of that work in a way that, I mean, not to say that computer terminals with their emails or whatever in them, in various games don't work, but they're also kind of weird because there's so little email. Like, I don't know what your inbox looks like these days, but you know, but
it's
like
very forced.
to be in like the Fallout world or any of these science fiction worlds where there's like, you go to a computer and there's like 3 emails on it, you're like, this is not representative of reality. I get why obvious, it's done for obvious reasons, but it also just doesn't work in some ways. It's it's an
It
abstraction,
is
and
the
it's,
apocalypse. I mean, come on. Like how
well,
much
it's
email
not
are
always
you
the
doing?
apocalypse. It's
I
not
know,
not
I
all
know.
games that have emails in them are apocalypses.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
but anyway, yeah, that's definitely
Yeah,
true.
it helped. It helped make the collectibles because I don't know about you, but even to your point on the logical aspects of it, finding a piece of paper versus going to a computer terminal and scrolling through a bunch of emails, those are two different experiences from a collectible standpoint, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I found the computer. I might have hacked into the computer. Now I'm scrolling through emails and finding the one that pertains to what I want, or reading other ancillary stuff. But looking under a bed to find a piece of paper is definitely better, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, and I have one small thing I want to mention before we end.
Well, and I
Otherwise, but
actually also want to talk about Oscar a little bit, which is not something. So I don't, yeah, like I alluded to earlier, it's like maybe the point to skip over if you're listening to with children. I kind of wanted to see how much of that you got. But go ahead with yours, and then we'll talk about Oscar.
well, it relates to my sort of like picking constraints and using, and having a small team and a small budget and really like doubling down. The interesting thing that is a sort of a small takeaway for me that I would bring forward in my day job is because they had an economical approach to the game, maybe because of necessity. I wanted to talk about the waste paper baskets. Now,
Yeah.
in a video game, right, you reuse assets as best as you can, and you'll want to as much as you can, so you don't have to make multiple ones. But in a lot of houses, you're going to have different. A lot of people will have different waste paper baskets in different rooms, usually, um, uh, or at least some variation, right? And they use the same one throughout the game. But the reason I'm bringing it up is that was probably a choice as well as a constraint, as well as a production reality. But the cool thing about it for me that is a takeaway is that it also was a usability and visual language. Um, and, one might say, level design or set dressing decision because it created a language with the player to say, okay, that waste paper basket I recognize, I know what it is, it's throughout the house. Oftentimes, there is discarded collectible information in there that I'll want to read because it's somebody threw it away. So it also has meaning because they threw it away, because they discarded it. And so when you're going through the house, that little waste paper basket became a signal that, like in another game, like the obvious example is a crate or a barrel or a chest in an RPG. It's like, okay, I'm looking for those because I want resources from them. So you teach the player that, even though we don't find barrels full of things in our normal lives, but we do find waste paper baskets. And so it was just an interesting small note to me that even within the constraints, there are advantages to the player from a usability standpoint to have some of that consistency, albeit it might have been a production reality because they didn't want to make another one or another 10. But it also worked for me because it told me what I might find in there. I sought them out. So
And
anyway,
it's a
it was
wire
tiny.
basket, so you can see into it. So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
which
there's
is
a
a
lot of
great choice.
it's a small thing, but it stuck with me for some reason. And I think it's a small thing that was expanded out in my mind when it comes to game development of a reality of why you might actually use the same one, whether that was intentional or not, or just production. It had a secondary effect.
Yeah, that's a good call. That's a good call. An interesting tidbit. We're running extremely short on time. What what was so? I asked earlier about what the relationship was between Oscar and Terry. What is the deeper relationship between Oscar and Terry?
Yeah, so you mentioned that earlier, but I don't, other than Oscar lost his pharmacy, but I actually don't remember. I don't think I understood why.
Okay,
Yeah, so
so
I don't think I picked up on that.
okay, I think I'm going to take that offline because it is, like I said, it's not appropriate for all ears. So I told people to skip ahead. But anyway, I'll tell you offline what's going on there that you might have not picked up on. There is a hidden depth to that story that might not have been apparent.
Ah, okay, interesting.
All right. Well, that is our discussion of Gone Home. We are going to do a little walking simulator series here in the middle of our indie games, and we will do kind of a takeaways rather than doing them for each game. One that kind of broadly talks about the genre because we'll be playing games from all basically over the period of a year or year and a half. So as Tim mentioned, next week we will play Dear Esther, and we have another one picked out for the week after that. And we may, I don't know, we may do a separate takeaways episode or just make one extra long episode. We'll see how that goes. We love to get your reviews. You can shoot us those on the Apple infrastructure or really wherever you listen to this podcast. We think we're a 5-star cast. I hope you do too. You can shoot us an email at devgameclub@gmail.com. We're also on the web at devgameclub.com, and you can find my co-host when he's at least not on his trip gallivanting around Europe at twitch.tv/
And Lago Jr. with the JR at the end.
We also
I'm not in Europe.
I know you're not in Europe. That's just my ongoing joke. I'm going to call you Katie from now on. We also have a fan-run Discord. There will be a link for that on the show notes. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, also in Portland, Oregon. Commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers, and our logo, the Discord, our merch store, all by Mark Garcia. Have fun making friends, even when you're shy this week, and good night.
Good night.